Good day. So this is just a simple weather forecast web application using ReactJS or NextJS with GitHub Authentication. So what this web app basically do is it allows you to input a location or a city and then display the current weather of that location. But before you can do that, you will need to log in using your GitHub account. So if you're not logged in, the only page that is accessible is the login page. So here it is. The first page that you'll be able to see is the login page. But this website has three pages. One is the home screen, which you can input the city or a location. Another page is the page that will display the current weather, and the other one is here, the login page. So as you can see here in the login page, there is a welcome message and a button. So if you click this button, you'll be redirected to the GitHub Authentication. So let's try it. Click the sign in with GitHub, then click authorize. As you can see, here we are now in the home screen. In the home screen, you can see your name, your GitHub profile URL, an input for the location, and a button. You can also see that there is a logout button in our header, and that button will not display if we're not yet authenticated. So now let's try to enter a city in this input. Let's try Manila. Then click the display weather button. Now as you can see, here we are now in the display weather page, and you can see here the date, temperature, description, main, pressure, and the humidity. Now let's click the back button and try a different city. Let's say Bulacan. Alright, so it is showing the weather in Bulacan. Now let's try another city again. Let's say Butuan. Alright, so that also displays the weather in Butuan. Now let's try to use the web app with the mobile screen size. Let us check its difference from a larger screen size. Let's enter a city again. Let's try Bulacan. Now as you can see, the table only displays the date and the temperature. But if you view it on a larger screen, you can see the full details of the weather. Alright, so the last part of this application is the logout. So if we click the logout button, you should be logged out and then redirected to the login screen and won't have access to the other screens. So let's try. Now you can only access the login screen. So I think that's it for the demonstration, and now let's proceed to the code. So here we are now in our code. So let's go first with the project structure. So this is a NextJS project, so we have default folders, the pages folders that contains our routes and pages, public and styles. So I added the components, the layout, and the utilities folder. The components folder contains all the components of our application. As you can see, we have here the header component and the logout component. So if you can see in our app, this is the header component and this is the logout component. I separated the logout component to the header so that I won't have to rewrite the logout component if I'll be adding a logout button to the other parts of the application. Next is the layout folder. This folder contains all the layout of our application. For our case, this is just a simple project and only needed one layout. But if this project will go bigger and we wanted to show different layout for different users, it is important to have a different directory to organize all of our layouts. Next is the utils folder, which is short for utilities. This folder contains all the utilities or the reusable functions that can be used anywhere in our project. So we have here the date format. It is important to have a function for formatting text or dates for us to be consistent with the format or display across our project. And also we have here the GitHub user URL, which I will discuss later. We also have here our env file, which contains our API keys, GitHub secret, and GitHub client ID, which we will use for getting the weather and for authentication. it is important to place our API keys and secrets in our env file. Now let's go to our pages folder. As you can see here, we have 3 pages: the login, home, and the weather. We also have our authentication using NextAuth. Now let's go to the login page, since this is the first page that we'll see when we open the app. As you can see, here is the welcome message and the login button. When we click this login button, it will call the sign-in method provided by NextAuth, and it will open the GitHub Authentication for us. We also have here the get server-side props function, and in this function we will be checking if the user is already logged in our application. So we have to get the session details from NextAuth. So if the user is not yet authenticated, he can only access the login page. This is the opposite for the other 2 pages, right? We will only allow access to those pages if the user is already logged in or authenticated. Now let's go to the home page. Same goes with the home page. We have these get server-side props, and in here we are checking if the user is authenticated. If the user is not yet authenticated, we will redirect him to the login page. But if the user is authenticated, we will get his session details and pass it as props to our page. So to get the user's GitHub link, we are calling the GitHub user URL utility function. And the reason behind this is the session details only contains name, email, and image path, and does not include the username or the profile link. So I discovered that the image path contains the user ID. So in the GitHub user URL function, I used split to get the user ID and pass it to the GitHub API to get more user information, including the user's GitHub profile link. Now here in our home page, we have the name of the user, his GitHub profile link, an input, and a button. Here in the input, I used useref instead of useState, since we are only accessing the input value after clicking the button, and we don't have any input validation while typing. And it can also prevent our component to be re-rendered while changing the input value. Now if we click this button, we will be redirected to the weather page, and we will pass the input value as query parameter. Here in our weather page, first we will check if the user is authenticated. Next, we will use the passed query parameter from the home screen to request the current weather using the Open Weather Map API. And after that, our page will receive the weather as props. Here in our page, you can only see a table which contains the weather and a back button. We have here 2 tables, one table for the desktop view or a larger screen size, and one for the mobile view or a small screen size. It is possible to make it in just one table, but I think it's cleaner to separate the tables and just use CSS to hide one if the screen reaches a certain size. And now let's go to the last part, which is the logout. In the logout, I just called the signout function provided to us by NextAuth. And I think that's it for the demonstration and the code. Thank you.